name is Dustin Dumas, and today I am presenting on my third great-grandfather, Alexander Branscombe, and he's a Civil War veteran. But part of this presentation is that I'd like to tell people how they can start with genealogy. So again, I'm going to discuss Alexander Branscombe. And so these are some of the resources that I use. I use Ancestry.com, which we have here in the library, which is a wonderful resource. The internet, the National Parks Service via the internet, which you can also find here in the library, the National Archives and Records Administration, and various websites. Now these are not the only things that I've used, but these are a lot of the things I've used. So let's start with Ancestry.com. Ancestry.com, which is available here, this is what you would see when you log on. And actually, you don't have to log on. You can just go into Ancestry.com and you will come up with this search page. On the search page, you will see that you can search using a lot of different criteria. So, for example, you can go by name, you can go by historical records, birth records, anything that you know. So you start where you are. You don't have to know a lot in order to get started. On the bottom of the page, you can also see that Ancestry has a map, and this map is the map they show is of the U.S., but they have different tabs here, so you can go to other parts of the world as well. And the whole point of that is, let's say, for example, you think you may have relatives in Montana, but you're not sure, you can actually go to the state of Montana and do a search there and start from there. So you can be very general and then become very specific. The other thing to note is that on the right-hand side, you have different collections. So, for example, at the bottom, we have the African American collections, the American Indian records, the Jewish family history. So these things can be very specific to your family or what you're searching for. But the whole point is that Ancestry.com gives you a lot of different ways to search and start genealogy. So, I mentioned that I'm only focusing on my third great-grandfather, Alexander Branscombe. And that is because when you're starting off doing the family tree, you don't want to go to all the different branches. So I've been very focused on my mother's side, so that it wouldn't be a huge family tree because it could really grow. So just to give you an idea of where I am in this family tree, here I am at the bottom. This is my mother, and I have to say that she is the person who really started this. I started this just to continue where she left off. This is my grandmother over there. This is my great-grandfather, Luther Branscombe. My second great-grandfather, Hartwell Branscombe, and this gets us to Alexander Branscombe, who is my third great-grandfather, and also the Civil War veteran. So we're going to focus on this, and we're going to see some of the different things that I was able to find online using Ancestry.com, the internet, and other sources. So we can see that according to the 1900 census, Alexander Branscombe was born in March of 1832 in Virginia. And to give you an idea of what a census schedule looks like, and that's what they call the census. They call this schedule. So this one is from 1900, as you can see at the top. And you can see the specific information about Alexander Branscombe. You can see that if you go from left to right, you can see his name, Branscombe Alexander. He's the head of the household. B is because he's black, M male, and March 1832, and at the time of the census he was 68. So I do want to point out that Alexander's name is spelled Alixander, and that's not how you usually spell the name. But as I take you through the presentation, you'll see that even on the government documents, a lot of the name spellings are spelled in ways that you would never guess. So part of starting genealogy is that you have to be a detective. So don't assume that a name that you are used to seeing spelled a certain way is going to be spelled that way, even on government documents. The next thing I learned about Alexander is that this is part of his Civil War service. So the muster in and muster out dates are 1863 to 1866. All this information was found on Ancestry.com on what is called a muster card. It's It's a card that basically, for every month that he's in the military, it shows he was active. So what I like about this is that it gives you a lot of information that you would not necessarily find outside of just in other documents. And to give you an idea what this muster in, muster out card is, this is what it looks like. So each column represents a month that he was active in the military. The first, so there are many other pages because he was in for 3 years. But I wanted to start with the first page, which is the muster in. And basically muster in and muster out, that basically means when he enlisted, and mustering in, and mustering out means when he was discharged. So on this, at the top you can see the 59. And another thing when you're looking at genealogy resources, keep in mind that a lot of the script is very fancy and ornate compared to what we're used to, and you really, along with the spelling changes that we may not be used to, also the font and the type of writing style may be unfamiliar to a lot of people. So this is the muster in card. His name is at the top highlighted. And you can see that he enlisted or mustered in on May 28, 1863, in LaGrange, Tennessee, and he was in the military for 3 years. And the whole reason this is important is that gives you an idea, and that muster in card, that's where you can find that on Ancestry.com, which is available at the library, so you can find a lot of the stuff that you need just here. So one of the pieces of information that I found was that his regiment was responsible for light artillery. So when I was thinking, I don't know a lot about weapons, Civil War weapons, and my first thought was, well, light artillery is something that you could probably carry on your person, like a shotgun. And then I looked this up using another resource in the library, books, and that's something that we should also be cognizant of as well. We do have a lot of great online sources like Ancestry on the internet. We have online burial records, all these types of things. But the book is, the basic book is also a wonderful thing to have as well, because you can see that when I went to the books to find out what light artillery meant, this is what it meant. So these are cannons, and these were carried along with the horses and the food and the pots and the pans, the people, of course, anything that they needed to get from one point from one part of the war to the next. The next slide gives you an idea of how you're able to combine resources, those that are online with those that are in books. So this is obviously a Google map, and you can see A is where he started. He mustered in there. And this A, B, in Corinth, Mississippi, F and C are actually the same. So he went to Memphis, he went on to Ripley, Tennessee, went up to Lafayette, Tennessee, and then back to Memphis. So this gives me an idea. So I was able to integrate the online map from Google to get a better perspective of what was, what he had to do and what his regiment had to do. And the way I was able to do that was actually look at different books that were available. So they have a lot of books that are on the Civil War. So for example, if you are doing something, mine is obviously very military related because I'm specifically talking about my third great grandfather. But let's say that you had relatives who immigrated to the U.S. and you knew that it was in a particular period of time. There are books that are available so that you can find out and get more information. So that was what I was able to do, because according to the military records, it was great because I could see that he mustered in LaGrange, Tennessee. But it took books on his regiment, it took books on his company for me to understand like the entire area that he had to go, that he and his regiment had to travel. So another thing that's available online, specifically at Ancestry.com, is this is a document from the Department of Interior and the Bureau of Pensions. So there are a few things that I thought were very important to me personally, because I could see on this particular document that my grandparents, when it was legal, they were married. They were married by the chaplain in the military, from the military. I could see the number of children that they had. I could see the ages. I could see a lot of different things that I would not have had access to. So some of the, and just because I have this stuff, I'm sure there are so many other things out there, which is, that's nice to know because I can continue to search. But this gives me an idea of, the type of person he was. He definitely wanted to be married. And I should mention, the reason why this was so important was because he and his wife, it was illegal for them to be married before this. So that's why it was such a big step. And again, these types of documents are available on Ancestry.com. So I mentioned marriage, and this is my third great grandmother, Susan. Excuse me. And the reason I have it here, first of all, this is a copy of a photo. This is not the actual photo. I have no idea where the real photo is. But the reason I wanted to keep it in this format is that, sometimes when we try and crop the photos and we want to make them look great, this is the type of information we lose. And so this was something that whoever had the photo had at the top. So the one that identifies Alex and Susan. And again, notice how they spell Alex's name. So when you're doing this kind of research, you really have to just think out of the box. Alex could be spelled. Well, I'll show you a little later how Alex could be spelled. But it's important to keep that with the documents, with whatever picture. The other reason why I didn't want to crop it is that at the bottom, it gives me a lot of information that I did not have before. So you can see that my third great grandmother, she was born in Tennessee, and I would never have guessed that. But if someone had, even if I had taken it and cropped out the photo, I would have, those two pieces of information would have been lost. One, that yet another way to spell Alex is E-L-E-X, and of course, where she was born. And just to go back to this, one of the reasons why it's so important to have the photos and things like that is you want to make sure that you write anything on there that you can, whether it's the location, whether it's the name, the age, anything, because all of that stuff becomes very important for later generations. So, for example, even now that we have a lot of digital photos, still tag them and put them on there, because right now I'm guilty of this as well, where I have a lot of photos and I know who everyone is in that photo, but as I go on, there may not be anybody who knows who's in the photos, and I'm encountering that now with a lot of my relatives who have since died, and they can't really tell me, they obviously can't tell me about the people in the photos. So starting now, it's a good idea just to start labeling them. The other thing that you can find on Ancestry.com, I mentioned that obviously Alexander was in the military, but they have specific schedules for, and by schedules, this is additional information. And so one thing I learned about him was that he was injured. His arm was injured by a shell. And I also found out that he's needy, and this is needy in the financial sense, not in any other sense. And so, now I'm starting to put a picture together, because now I find out that he's married. I find out that he has several children. I find out that he volunteered for the Civil War. I find out that he, financially he's not doing very well. But these, instead of just being this person on a piece of paper, now it sort of gives me a better idea of who he was as a person and who his family was. And again, on Ancestry. So one of the cool things about just having an internet service, which is also obviously available here at the library, is that because my ancestor was in the Civil War, and it's not just people who are in the Civil War, but any like Korea, Vietnam, any of those wars, you can find out details about the soldiers. So the same stuff that I found on Ancestry, I found on this site as well, because everything from the side of the Civil War he fought on to the company, his rank in and rank out. But one thing that interested me, I saw that there's this plaque number C70. I was like, what is that? And I found out that in Washington, D.C., at the African American Civil War Museum and Memorial, they have this beautiful memorial, and you see the silver, the sterling silver, the steel background on the back, those are all the names on plaques of over 210,000 African American men who fought in the war. So then the C-70 made sense to me. The C-70 was part of the 59th Regiment, which was which is the infantry that my third great grandfather fought in. And then you can see that his name is there. And just to emphasize once again that the names are spelled differently. The correct spelling of the name should have a B on the end of it, but because of these documents and who is transcribing them, they're all different all the time. So just another reminder. And this is actually this is in Washington D.C. on the monument. So these are just a few of the many ways I have found his name spelled online. Not with family or anything like that, but these are government documents that show this is how his name is spelled. So you have to, when you're thinking about how someone's name is traditionally spelled or how you expect it to be spelled, deviate a little bit just so that you can find out more information. Because if you're thinking about Alexander as being spelled only this way, you miss out on a lot of information. I should mention that on one of the documents on Ancestry, the name was so far out there that they actually had in brackets Alexander as it's traditionally spelled in case somebody ran across it and said, oh, this couldn't possibly be the same person. So that way you could gather that information as well. So this is a city directory. The family ended up staying in Memphis, which is where you could see from the map he ended up mustering out. And what I like about the city directories, these are basically like phone books, but I had never heard of them before I started doing the research. What I like about these city directories is that it gives you very specific information. For example, it has his name, and C is, at that time, African Americans were labeled as colored, so I can see that that's where I can see that he's a carpenter. I can see that his residence was, on this street in the Orange Mound area of Memphis. So the whole point of this is that the city directories come out every year. The census schedules come out every 10 years. So I could look like between 1900 and 1910, and I could see where, one, as I told you in the beginning, he was not educated or anything like that, but you can see that he's gotten to the point where now he's a carpenter. He's able to provide for his family. Even from the military records, you can see that he was needy. In subsequent city directories, you can see where his sons have moved next door to him. And then this is confirmed with the census data. The other thing about the census data is that you can see where his family, where he and his wife understood and knew that education was important, because you can see there's one of the columns in the census says basically who's enrolled in school and who has been enrolled in school in the last 9 months, can read and write, and it's just pretty amazing to me to visually see how important education was for Alexander and his wife, for his children, because every census it's marked off. All the children, yes, can read and write, every single one. And so, when I look at that, I can see that, there are some things that are very important. One, getting married. One, the education, not just for him, but also for his family. But I can see where he's also bettered himself by being a carpenter. And if on some of the census reports, you can see where he started off as, I can't remember the term, but basically where he was responsible for wagons. So he was the person who did that. And so as he became more and more interested in bettering himself, he did more things. But this is nice to have the city directory, because I can see year by year how his family changed. The other thing about the census is you can see who was living in that particular house. So you can see from one census to the next where you see his, obviously his wife is there, you see his children there. But then he brought in his daughter-in-law, he brought in the grandchildren. I was thinking, how cool is that? Because like in our day and age, it's, at least where I grew up, it's very rare that you actually have your grandparents living in the home. You may, like I live maybe a few blocks away from my grandmother, but I can imagine that's a very different perspective to have your grandparents living in the home. And so these are the things to me, like the city directory, the personal stories from people who have passed them on. These are the things that make this interesting, because then Alexander's just not a Civil War veteran who fought for 3 years, but now it gives me a different flavor about, oh, he was a carpenter, oh, his children, they migrated to the Chicago area. So these are some, like I said, those are some of the things that you can find while you're looking at Ancestry.com, online, all these other things. So when you're starting your genealogy research, first of all, start with what you know. So I started I didn't start, but I showed my third great-grandfather because I wanted to give you an idea of what was available. But you have to start with the next generation, your parents, your grandparents, whatever you don't know. Use several types of resources. Use books, use online. Here we have Ancestry.com, which is wonderful because it has so much information. It's unbelievable. And the thing I like about Ancestry is that every time I log on, if I don't log on for like a few weeks or so, there's always an update. So I get this, it'll automatically say, hey, we've added more stuff, between 1930 and 1950. So if you were looking for stuff there, you don't have to physically go to the National Archives in DC. It's right there at your fingertips. And in addition, one of the other resources is to tap into your family. So obviously there's nobody living who knew my third great-grandfather, but of course there are stories that are told that are passed down. These things, if they're available to you, you should write them down, because that is also something that is very important in doing genealogy, because there have been some things that I've learned from distant relatives that helped me understand how I should approach a particular, branch of a family tree. And thinking of the branches, again, I know I mentioned this earlier, when you're doing the branches of the tree, try and be very focused and narrow, because I focused on my mother's side because she has a few siblings. On my dad's side, he has 14. So you can really branch out and, but you should stay focused just so that you're not going all different ways. And it is so interesting too, because unlike maybe in school when you're learning history that is far removed, this is about your family, and it's really interesting to find out that information. But stay focused. The other thing I mentioned before is to put the names and dates and the locations on all of the photos, because 50 years from now, or 100 years from now, the people who would be interested in knowing who is on those photos won't have you here to tell about those people. And doing genealogy is very much like being a detective, because, as I mentioned, everything from the locations may not be correct. Maybe someone thought they lived in, a relative lived in South Orange, but actually maybe it was in Maplewood at that time because the border was different. The names may be spelled differently, all of these different things. So it's like putting different clues together, and that's the best way to approach it, is just to think of it as being a science as opposed to something that's very hard and fast. So that's how we're making history. All history is local, because it starts with you right here.